Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis. This show is coming to you live tonight from the DC TV studios in Washington, D.C. Today's show is the 36th segment in the series on the network of global corporate control. Our show tonight will answer the question whether the 1789 Constitution of the United States is in effect or whether we are being governed by martial law that our representatives in the United States Congress have been secretly keeping in place ever since 1861 by declaring secretly behind closed doors a state of emergency. I sent a letter to the District of Columbia Bar by priority mail that was delivered on December 11th. This letter was in response to an article about Gene Shipp, who for 35 years has worked in the District of Columbia Bar's Office of Bar Counsel, which regulates the legal profession in the District of Columbia. The last 4 segments of this series were archived on the internet this weekend, and I've had time to answer some of the questions in the YouTube comment section and by email. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. We've been telling you about the transnational companies on the world's capital markets that are all interconnected in an incestuous relationship of interlocking boards. At the very center of this network are the central banks that issue paper money in exchange for goods and services that have real value. There's a coalition for the rule of law on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, which consists of 188 ministers of finance and development. This coalition is stronger than the network of global corporate control. I started working in the World Bank's legal department in 1986. It was Ibrahim Shihada, who had been the general counsel of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, who hired me into the World Bank. During my studies at Yale Law School, I wrote a legislative history of the Group of 77, which has grown now to 134 developing countries. I was locked out of the World Bank the day after I gave a legal opinion in 2009 to the 24 members of the World Bank Board of Executive Directors. I told them that they were in charge at the World Bank and that they were the ones running the World Bank, not the network of global corporate control. So after I was locked out, I bought a World Bank bond, and that gave me standing to sue in the United States federal court. The Board of Governors settled my case in 2012, but the United States Judicial Conference ignored the Board of Governors. I was flabbergasted, and I couldn't figure out why, and now I know. It's because the network of global corporate control thinks that it's above the law. I am now the lawyer for something called the Global Debt Facility, which is a trust that contains the world's international monetary gold reserves and other treasures. I learned from Ferdinand Marcos's son, Tiburcio Villamor Talano Taguian IV, last week that I'm also the overseer mandate trustee of the Global Debt Facility. That's because Tiburcio Villamor Talano Taguian wrote to me and said that we should form a partnership. I said that I was working for the Board of Governors of the World Bank, and only if they told me that they wanted a partnership would I have anything to do with him. It was Ferdinand Marcos who established the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II, and he helped set up the World Bank and International Monetary Fund so that the Board of Governors, which are the ministers of finance of the member countries, could administer the Global Debt Facility. And we've had some arguments this past week. Some people were saying that the Board of Governors were actually trying to appropriate the world's gold for themselves. This is a blatant lie. The ministers of finance and development have already determined what to do with the world's gold. That is to return the gold in the form of currency to each of the national entities. And the currency is going to be counted by the citizens. So people who are worried about whether their governments are going to have their hands all over the gold, no, the gold is going to the people of the world, of this planet. There was an agreement that was signed at the end of World War II. It's called the Bilateral Minefield Breakthrough Successor Agreement, where the nations of the world and the royalty as well agreed that the world's gold and other treasures would go to benefit all of humanity. But first, that these treasures would go into something called sequestration. That's 50 years of hiding. The period of sequestration ended in 2005, and ever since then, the network of global corporate control has been trying to steal these assets. And just in April, the International Court of Justice issued a bogus opinion saying that the paperwork for the trust was no longer valid. The International Court of Justice had absolutely no jurisdiction. I cleared a letter with the Board of Governors, and I said that that decision of the International Court of Justice had null effect. The Central Intelligence Agency also issued a memo following up on the decision of the International Court of Justice. That shows us that the CIA is not working for the United States. Why would an agency representing the United States try to cancel our international monetary gold reserves? It's very clear. The CIA is working for the network of global corporate control. As a matter of fact, they're not headquartered in Langley, Virginia. They're headquartered in Switzerland. There's much more gold in the global debt facility than the Gold Antitrust Action Committee says exists. The amount of gold is over 1,700,000 metric tons. The network of global corporate control has been rewarding stooges and punishing whistleblowers for a very, very long time. As loyal viewers on this series know, this network has been our secret puppet master since before the previous ice age. We know this from the Hapgood map that shows a coastline which is now buried under ice off the coast of Antarctica. We also know that there are civilizations buried along the coastlines ever since the level of the sea went up 400 meters. Actually, I think that's 400 feet. I stand corrected. And next week's series, which we taped previously, is going to show you a series of underground tunnels and cities that are crisscrossing the globe. We also know from Moscow State University, which has reconstructed ancient history after they found out that the network of global corporate control has been systematically falsifying it. When we talk about what we hear in the media, we're being given propaganda because the network of global corporate control controls the media. We read in the media, one of two things is likely. Either the United States dollar is going to be abandoned and collapse in value, and here they're talking about the Federal Reserve note. They're not talking about the US dollar. When the Federal Reserve note crashes, this is going to end Washington's superpower status, except that we are not going to sit on our hands and wait for the Federal Reserve note to crash. We are going to get out of Federal Reserve notes. We are going to go into United States dollars issued by the Treasury. We have a whole pile of uncut dollars that were printed by Ronald Reagan. There were a lot of questions about the study that Ronald Reagan commissioned called the Grace Commission Report, which shows that income taxes, all of them, leave the country. They go to the City of London to pay interest on country debt, and then the City of London, because of the Magna Carta, has an agreement that they will be paying tribute to the Vatican. So let's get back to the scenarios that we're hearing about in the media. They say that Washington is going to lead its puppets into military conflict with Russia and China. There is a third scenario, and that scenario is what is going to happen, and that's what we're talking about today. Yesterday, I got an email from Mark from Vancouver. By the way, just an aside, I'm trying very hard not to mention the syllable You just heard I did it again. I've been getting training on the job. I've been getting training from the people here at DC TV in how to be a good moderator. And I've been getting a lot of good advice from people who write in on comments on the archives that we place on the internet. And also there is a lot of commentary on the social media. I encourage you to contact me by email if you have any questions, because this coalition for the rule of law is a very vibrant one. It consists of people who are willing to do their homework to find out what the facts are and to turn our world around, because according to a power transition model, the likelihood that this is what we all do working together is over 90%. So let me get back to the email that I got from Mark. Can you please be real? Can you please help the planet not to go into a deconstructive depopulation phase? Can the transition actually be done in a mature way? With Fukushima, geoengineering happening, the death of the Pacific, etc., do we also need a financial meltdown as well? I think not. Karen, couldn't you actually be for real and give humanity some hope? Let me warn you that your karma will follow you to ends of time. I would like to believe you're real, but considering the level of corruption and deceit on this planet, I think not. Prove me wrong, please. I also heard from Michael, who was telling me that there's going to be no global currency reset to deploy the world's monetary gold reserves in the global debt facility. Michael told me that the coalition for the rule of law will not prevail over the network for global corporate control. And he also reminded me that the elite's slogan is own nothing but control everything, and that the elite like to tease us with entertaining cartoons in The Economist telling us that they will do just what is being shown to us. And maybe you can show what we got from The Economist for 2015 and for 2016. There are symbols in there that many people like to talk about. We're not going to waste our time with what the network of global corporate control thinks that is going to happen, because we, the Coalition for the Rule of Law, are the ones that are setting the agenda. What I told Michael and Mark is that the power transition model from the United States Department of Defense says our chances are excellent, above 90%, for managing the global currency reset. You can see how powerful this model is and how it's working as designed. There have been a series of articles in which Russia has been complaining that the World Bank is simply an instrument of Washington, that the International Monetary Fund is now changing its policies and is not requiring the Ukraine to bring its defaulted loans to Russia current before the International Monetary Fund provides its own assistance to the Ukraine. And what I did was I went on the internet and I made a few comments chiding Russia, saying that Russia is on the board of executive directors, and why isn't Russia changing what was voted if we have the votes? And we certainly do. This is an open question that needs to be responded to. There have also been a series of articles in which the Europeans are complaining about economic sanctions to Russia that are backfiring and harming their export industries. And so I reminded these countries of the legal opinion which I've been giving for a number of years, which is that the powers of the Board of Executive Directors and Board of Governors is they run the place. The network of global corporate control has absolutely no right to set the agenda. There was a memorandum that was written in 1947 whereby the board would voluntarily sit back and wait for the president of the World Bank to propose something, and then the board would simply rubber stamp it. And in 2009, I wrote an opinion saying that because of the corruption, that the board was no longer justified in maintaining that policy, and that policy was no longer in effect. I was locked out of the World Bank the next day. I have been reminding Germany that the Coalition for the Rule of Law includes the United States minus the Fed, and it's high time to replace Federal Reserve notes and other paper currencies in the world for national currencies that are minted out of the gold in the global debt facility. I have written to all of the ministers of finance and development that are members of the World Bank. I've also written to some of the countries like Taiwan, also informing them that they could replace their paper currency with gold from the international monetary reserves in the global debt facility. As a matter of fact, the Central Bank of Taiwan invited me to go to Taiwan and to hand over money for them to single-handedly clean up Fukushima. I refused to do that. I said that it was very important for the global debt facility to finance the cleanup of Fukushima, but that I was not going to be separated from the Board of Governors. I was not going to be a one-off person anointing one country or another, one crook or another, to access the money in the global debt facility. What I have said repeatedly is that there will be a very transparent process, and each of the countries will be involved in making sure that the gold is not going to go missing, and that all of the people are going to be involved in making sure that the country's gold that is minted in their currency does not go missing. This is not going to be an easy process because, as people know, the entire auditing profession, the entire legal profession have been co-opted by the network of global corporate control. They have their own self-monitoring mechanisms. That's what I'm going to be talking about in my correspondence to the DC Bar, because I complained to the DC Bar when the lawyers in the World Bank falsified some documents that were used in a tribunal case against me. When you falsify documents in a tribunal and you're a lawyer, you get disbarred. And yet Gene Shipp thought that it was perfectly all right for the World Bank legal department to falsify, use whiteout, to fake the documents that were used in my tribunal case. This doesn't wash. So we're going to have to be cleaning up the legal profession. We're going to have to be cleaning up the auditing profession if we want to see how much gold there is and make sure that it doesn't go missing. One of the things that I did with the teleprompter was I sent it to South Africa because I got an email from Steve a couple of days ago. Hi, Karen. Is the ouster of Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene of South Africa? South Africa is one of the BRICS, a worrisome development and a foreshadowing of many emerging nations' currencies collapsing. Also threatening the return to the rule of law, or are the collapse of these vulnerable currencies part of the transition process of the world reset to Aurum? And so I said back to Stephen that South Africa is the chair of the G77, which now consists of 134 developing countries. I said perhaps Minister Nhlanhla Nene is being removed because the developing countries want some action on the global currency reset, and His Excellency Nene was not getting the job done. And then I forwarded the letter which I had sent to His Excellency Nene, offering South Africa back its gold from the global debt facility, which is administered by the 188 ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF. Minister Nhlanhla Nene did not accept. There are 2 countries from the Commonwealth which have told me who their negotiating teams are, and then I asked the other countries to give this information to the Development Committee. That is 25 ministers of finance that work together with the board to determine what the policies are. And this is the group that I have been writing to and corresponding with very regularly. This is the group that I've been talking to about the treasures that are owned by the global debt facility that have come to light, that we've been talking about on previous episodes. There's some diamonds that were worn by Ferdinand Marcos's wife, Imelda. There's some paintings Monet paintings. There's a train that's in a tunnel between two cities in Poland. There's a truck that has, I believe, 300 metric tons of gold that's outside of Moscow. All of these assets are owned by the Global Debt Facility, and it's the Board of Governors that has to determine how to dispose of these assets, whether they go into museums, where they go. This is not something that one or another government can decide. This is something that the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF are to decide. One of the very serious things that's going on is that the countries themselves are being interfered with, their governments are being interfered with by the network of global corporate control. And in the United States, what has happened is that the Constitution of 1789 is no longer in effect. It went out of effect because of, first there was a military government in 1861, and that military rule has never been rescinded. But then in 1871, there was a second secret constitution that went into effect. When I wrote my letter to Gene Shipp, I chided him on the fact that the lawyers are not telling people what their actual legal situation is. In my letter to Gene Shipp, I told him that it's the coalition on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF that's going to permit the United States to throw off its state capture. Let me read you some of the language in this letter. In Washington Lawyer's December issue, Dolores Dorsainville congratulated Gene Shipp for his 35 years in the District of Columbia Office of Bar Counsel. Gene is absolutely right when he claims that the self-regulation of the legal profession is ours to lose. Gene Shipp's decision to allow the World Bank's legal department to falsify evidence was bad ethics. It's already a foregone conclusion that the world's lawyers have lost their right to self-regulation. America's lawyers went AWOL, that's absent without leave, in covering up the fact that the United States is currently under martial law, that people who have paid off mortgages on their land, homes, cars, and other property do not have title because the states are providing mere warranties of title, that federal judges do not preside over the courts under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, but simply administer admiralty law courts. Lawyers even refuse to answer the point-blank question whether Congress has been extending a state of emergency since 1861. We are now wondering whether there should be a legal profession as we put the network of global corporate control identified by 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology into receivership in the Global Debt Facility that is administered by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. We have not yet heard back from the District of Columbia Bar, but we have been hearing of a very serious development. That is what's going on in the Patriot community. And we have a very serious situation on our hands because what recently happened is that there was an arrest made for a sale of a rifle which was sawed off. The sale was actually an informant who was trying to goad a young man. I've got his name somewhere. The teleprompter is trying to catch up with me. And this is a man, a very serious man, who wants to find out whether the judges are following their oaths. He wants to find out. It's Skylar Barbeau. Yes, thank you. He was involved in last year's standoff on the Bundy Ranch in Nevada, which involved grazing rights. A federal informer set Barbeau up on the sale of a firearm. This is a red flag for the Patriot community. there's an even more serious confrontation that's coming to a head in January. This involves the threat of 5 years of imprisonment for 2 men in an Oregon cattle ranching family. This family is named Hammond. The Patriot community knows full well that the United States Constitution is no longer in force and effect. The time for the United States to regain its Constitution is right now, and this is to happen peacefully. The network of global corporate control and its agents and its lawyers are to acknowledge the corruption. And it's to be acknowledged now. In another couple of months, we are no longer going to have a peaceful means of transitioning to the rule of law. Herman Wijfels, who represented the Netherlands on the board of the World Bank, has said in The Economy of the Future, "We have hit the boards enormously wrong on all the fronts." And in a television interview in December 2014, "It's my sincere opinion that through different developments and circumstances, the elite, not only in our country but in others, have betrayed their duty to the people." The World Bank trains its staff in change management. One of the most important tools of change management is self-knowledge and self-change. When I turned 50, we had a 360-degree review at the bank with input from managers, reports, and colleagues. I got a near-perfect score on Tells senior management what it's doing wrong. 17 years ago, in 1998, I was on the Drysdale Committee that was working with the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors on a program to improve the World Bank's personnel policies. The Coalition for the Rule of Law is going to make sure that this program is implemented. Better late than never. There have been some acrimonious debates in the internet with a person who worked for the Vatican, who's admitted that she is an advisor to the Vatican, named Anna von Reitz. Anna von Reitz has done a number of things. One of the things she's done is she's filed a commercial lien for $279 trillion against the American Bar Association. Now, it's very true that the American Bar Association is at fault, but it's also true that $279 trillion, those amounts of currency, they're designed to gum up the transition, the global currency reset. We have got to be very serious in working with the Board of Governors at the World Bank, and the Board of Governors has to be very serious in representing the interests of their people and not the interests of the network of global corporate control. Many people are asking me what they should do to help the Coalition for the Rule of Law. I tell them all that they should form a discussion group, and this discussion group doesn't have to be more than 4 people. It should be people that you would want to stay involved with as we go forward to introduce local currencies in the towns and villages, and also to help others figure out what's going on. Turn off your mainstream media news and most of your alternative media. Stay tuned to DCTV. Become active in other public outlets for news. Thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've been discussing the serious situation that the Network of Global Corporate Control has been provoking in the Patriot community. The provocations with our allies in Europe, with our other allies, with our currency. We've also been discussing the peaceful and easy path that remains open and can easily solve these problems. All we have to do is to replace Federal Reserve notes. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudes.